Have you ever wondered how it is that your childhood wounds are impacting you in midlife? How has ancestral wounds followed you through your bloodlines? And how
Mm.
is this having an impact on your health, your career, your marriage, your relationships? We're going to get into it today. My name is Tisha, and I am your midlife makeover maven, and welcome to the Midlife Makeover Movement. Today, our guest is Carolyn Coleridge, who is a licensed psychotherapist, an intuitive healer, a meditation teacher, and an author. And we are so lucky to have you here. Today, we're going to be talking about how in midlife can we go back into our ancestry and get into holistic healing.
Sounds fantastic.
Carolyn, welcome, welcome, welcome. I just want to say thank you so much for taking time out to chat with us. You and I spoke on another panel a little while
Mhm.
ago, and I was so impressed by how much you knew. And I felt like you were like speaking my language. You were like hitting the nail on the head as I am on my healing journey. So we're going to get into a bunch of different things. I really kind of want to talk to you. You deal with a lot of women, a lot of
Mhm.
women my age, and we talked a little bit about some patterns that you've been seeing in your practice and how maybe we don't know how unhealed wounds is showing up in our life currently. So tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and we can get into the conversation.
Sounds fantastic. Again, thanks for having me. I enjoyed being on the panel with you, and I think this is a very, very important topic, and I'm excited to talk about it. So, I've been a psychotherapist for 30 years, and I have four licenses, two active. And I've been working as a therapist, but I got into energy healing. And energy healing is there's what's something called Reiki. There's also pranic healing I do, and I also do theta healing. And I had
Okay,
my
pause. I
okay,
need you to define for us what those things are. I've heard of
okay.
Reiki, but I haven't heard of the other two. So let's talk about those.
Okay, great. Yes. So Reiki is a Japanese art form of energy healing. Then there's pranic healing is more Indian, prana meaning life force. And like chi is life force in Chinese, ki is life force in Japan. In India, they call it prana. So pranic healing is very similar, where you're kind of clearing the energy field. The third one I mentioned was called theta healing. Theta is a brain wave, and we are in the beta state as we talk. And as we meditate, we go to alpha. And then if we went a step higher, we go to theta. If we wanted to go lower, that would be delta. That's when we sleep. So theta was created by a woman named Yana Steibel, and she's in Idaho, and she helped heal herself of cancer by changing the vibratory energy through a connection to God. It's a very spiritual healing, and a connection to energy and to source and to shifting it. So it's a method where you hear people's beliefs. Like they may have a belief that I'm not good enough, or I'm not deserving, I'm not worthy, I'm a horrible person. And through kinesiology, which is muscle testing, we actually test, and I do this in therapy, you test the muscles of somebody. So if somebody tests strong, meaning they put their arm straight out and then you test it, that means yes. And then if you test it and it's weak, it's no. And then what we do is we connect to the divine, we take a breath in and out, and then we shift the energy and they can feel the shift. So it's a meditative type of healing technique, and that's called theta healing. And I do, do that regularly with clients. And then also an author. I wrote a couple of books. One is Honor Your Spirit, which is the book about my path as a psychotherapist, an intuitive, and a healer. And then Soul Wisdom is a book. It's like a mindfulness book. So every day you can like open it, and it has different topics like intuition, energy, and healing. Um, I got on the path like a psychotherapist. Why are they doing energy healing? Because what happened is my mother was very intuitive herself. So my mother had a lot of spiritual gifts. She had a lot of dreams, and she was a chemistry teacher. She had a PhD. She has a PhD from Yale and she has an master's from Columbia. So she's very trained in the sciences, but she had a sixth sense and she had dreams and premonitions that came true. So when I was studying at Columbia, I started to have the same type of opening and I would just get messages about my clients, and I would see colors and auras around them at times, and it was all about helping their soul to grow, learn, and change. And when I told my mother about it, I said, "My God, Mom, I was 28, and that age is important. I'll talk about that in a minute." I said, "Mom, I'm starting to see ghosts." She's like, "Okay, yeah, sure. How are your grades?" Like she normalized it because it was part and parcel of how she was able to understand her soul path here on earth by connecting to God. I really think it's no different than Harriet Tubman. I'm not saying they're on the same level, but was able to listen to God's messages and then put it forth. And ironically, in the world, we go through our dreams, our intuition, we call it discernment, holy discernment. It's another way I use it from the divine, and feelings and knowings and hunches. And I believe a lot of African American women got through life that way. And working at a mental health clinic in LA in the Crenshaw district, I worked with a lot of Crenshaw and Ladera Heights, which is two economic levels in LA, and it's mostly African American, 75%. And I was worked with so many, majority of my caseload were Black women. I mean, there were only two Black therapists, maybe three out of 40, and 75% are African American. So I established several groups and I heard different themes over and over again. And one was a deep soul wounds that really was not addressed. Sometimes some of the people there, the patients I'd see would talk about, my therapist didn't hear me. Oh, I'm so glad you're Black. I'm so glad you're able to really hear me on a deep level and not feel judged. Because our culture can be so isolated and stigmatized and also demonized and um, degraded, like you sometimes patients, you don't want to open up to somebody who doesn't get your culture because you feel like you're being judged and attacked. And I've had that experience too. So as I was listening to them talk, I heard generational wounds, wounds that were unfulfilled, unprocessed, unhealed. And a lot of times, I've heard them say, gosh, um, my other therapist wouldn't listen to that, or they felt uncomfortable. Like for example, I did a meditation every Saturday. One time I had 29 people in the room on a Saturday morning at 10. All it just happened to be, I mean, we have Latinos, we have a little bit of Asian, a lot of white. It was all African Americans, and they talked about how they felt nobody listened to them, or the therapists were afraid of them, or they didn't hear them. And I was, it hurt me so on such a deep level. It's important to know that my father is also a psychotherapist. He got a he was a social worker and he went to a psychoanalytic psychotherapy training at Blanton Peel Institute. Blanton Peel is the person who wrote The Power of Positive Thinking, which is a wonderful book. And my father went there in 66, the year I was born, and he got a certificate in psychoanalytic psychotherapy, which is deep work.
Okay,
So,
pause for a second before we go further. You talked about a soul wound. Can you explain how
oh,
soul wound and trauma are related? Are they the same thing or are they different things?
really great question. Thank you. Um, soul wounds are soul wounds are a deep. Do you hear the feedback? No?
No, you're
Okay.
fine.
So soul wounds are our soul comes in with things to learn, to grow, and to understand. And as African Americans, we're soul people, soul food, soul music, because that deep, deep essence of energy, a lot of us are connected to the divine because that's how not only we're raised, but I also feel like we're the first people God created. So we have this strong connection. So soul wounds, and everyone has soul wounds, every culture, but I see it on a deep level because they're unaddressed in African Americans sometimes. There's a lot of great people out there doing wonderful work. on a deep level when it's kind of like I could go there with them and not let them feel judged. But so soul wounds are very similar to trauma. And when you have trauma, an unexpected incident or occurrence that's outside of the norm that creates a lot of pain, um, sadness, uh, more trauma and grief, that becomes a soul wound. So there's personal soul wounds within family lineage, maybe, fathers were in the home or left or alcoholism. And then there's cultural wounds, cultural soul wounds like the killing of Black boys, between each other and also, by certain agencies out there. In healthcare, how Black people have a high rate of um, health disparity, they call it, in terms of getting health care that's adequate. Black women giving birth, you've heard all about that. But I also see it because I worked in a hospital for like 20 years, more than that. But so there's health disparity. So those are soul wounds. Soul wounds could also be with culturally, the wound of not being seen and heard. The high blood pressure is a soul wound. The fact that the high rate of, prostate cancer in Black men when they're being emasculated, soul wounds. So it's a way to kind of, it's a deep thing. And again, it's something that's very, very deep. It's ancestral. So like your father may have a soul wound and he passes it down to, let's go way, way back to slavery, separation of the families, purposely and pitting each other, pitting the slaves against each other. That's a horrible soul wound in a diaspora. And they would, purposely put two fighting uh, clans or tribes together and then have them act out or separating us by color or separating us by, different languages or whatever it may be. That rage and sadness we still play out. I've seen it in the workplace.
So a soul wound, I
Yes.
was, how is a soul wound manifested? How do we know that it's there? Is it a manifestation of a behavior? Like, how do you pass a soul wound down? Like, how would I identify a soul wound within myself?
Okay. Thank you for clarifying because I talk about this stuff so second nature, and I'm glad that for your audience. A soul wound it's like trauma. It's very deep. Usually it's something it's like PTSD, something post-traumatic stress disorder. You think about all the time. Like I hear people say, "Oh, everyone in my family was an alcoholic. Grandpa was alcoholic, mom was alcoholic, you know, um, and now my son's an alcoholic." So that would be a soul and lineage, a soul wound. There are even maybe, and in theta healing we do ancestral, genetic, past lives, if you believe in past lives, and then the emotional body, the soul. So a historical soul wound would be workplace trauma, that Dr. Kamadi talks about. It could be not finding safe, good employment, the way we wear our hair, these are all soul wounds, negativity towards our beautiful melanin, which is a gift, negativity towards our lips, which now people are putting on themselves, um, where,
Would a soul wound show up like as shame, or how
oh,
show up in our lives? Is that, how would I know that I'm wounded in some way? How does that show up?
okay. It will show up with depression.
Okay.
It could show up with anxiety. It could show up with detaching, the classic, sometimes bipolar, which people say is chemical, but and schizophrenia. But I see a lot of people with bipolar and schizophrenia most likely had trauma before. I've seen that, like the clinical mental health may argue with me on that. How African Americans are overdiagnosed with schizophrenia but schizophrenia, when you hear and see things in certain cultures, in African cultures, like Malidoma Somé, who's a shaman who wrote a book called, oh, I can't think of the name, The Healing Wisdom of Africa. He was an African shaman, and he felt that a lot of there's an article online you can find, the shamanic view of mental illness, that when somebody's hearing voices and seeing things that other people don't within African culture and also Peruvian culture and probably a lot of other cultures, those are training for shamans. So a lot of the soul wounds are connected to, like you mentioned, shame, guilt. When people start using to cover it, shame of who they are, what body they are, what experience they have, the family lineage, shame that they did not grow up, they did not have money, so soul wounds will manifest in mental health disorders, or I like to call them mental health challenges, absolutely. And they'll also show up within our body with, for example, the reason why I got into energy healing is because I had fibroids. 78% of Black women have fibroids. And I wonder about all those, the trauma in the second chakra. Um, and chakra is an energy field or in our womb. And our womb with all that difficulty of abuse and rape and kids being killed and murdered and dying in African culture, that, I feel like it's created in the womb area, not just for one woman, but for the generations past. Okay.
So back to that book, like the body keeps score, right? So
Yeah.
you make you're functioning, or you put this trauma to the side so you can live in this society, but your body is manifesting something at some point.
Yes, blood pressure, a perfect example. Not being heard and listened to, your blood arises. Some people also, because African Americans usually have a high level of blood pressure, and blood in some cultures. There's a great author. A book is called "Women Who Run with the Wolves," and she's Latina. She's Mexican American, and she's a psychologist. And she said, "Blood is soul, is our soul, no matter what culture." So it's not surprising that our blood's boiling, that our high blood pressure. And um, I've noticed that when I was doing meditation and teaching, a lot of people have high blood pressure, and it would come when we meditate. So that's why, I got into meditation to just also to connect to the soul of people. So that would be another soul wound, high blood pressure, the large prostate issue with Black men, that they're emasculated. It's in their private area. The women with the trauma in the second chakra. Um, there's other ones, maybe headaches or different things. And, a lot of different cultures have it, but you see, I mean, I was just recently got a colonoscopy, and one of the symptoms I saw online, it says, what are the high risk factors? They actually said are African Americans. And the other person said, the doctor I went to said the same thing, and she was so sure I had it. But I had a clean colon. I was very happy. But maybe the colon is holding to me trauma in the stomach, like the word, I can't stomach this.
Right. We didn't get into a lot of conversation about this before, but I might have spoken briefly about when I was getting to my 50th birthday. I was not going into this with excitement and exuberance. I was actually going into it with trepidation because women in my family, by the time they were that age, were had illnesses like chronic and terminal illnesses. And
Mhm.
so I connected turning 50 with it's your turn to get sick, right? You're not going to
Interesting.
live very long. And so as I was going to 50, while I wanted to celebrate with a bang, I was really afraid that, you only got a couple more years left and you're going to be sick, or you're going to be dying, or you're going to have this, long-term ailment. So, I was concerned about that going in because I saw the manifestation of that, in my family. So there was some angst about that for me.
Yeah, and manifestation, and there's also those beliefs. And there's a great book by Bruce Lipton. He's it's like a biologist. He's a PhD, The Biology of Belief. And he believes that we can shift a lot of our beliefs, like I'm going to get cancer, I'm going to get this, epigenetics, because of, we're programmed to believe that. So maybe we have some of this, the same rules, the same, eating habits, but a lot of people are shifting that now, and also that belief system, I'm going to get sick. Our bodies listens to what we say.
Well, and there's
Yeah.
with me speaking over, it was in my family. You wait till you get this age and you can
Ah,
and you can expect that. And I'm like, I'm not getting ready to let y'all kill me. So I didn't believe it in my heart, but I also was not going to allow anybody to speak that, over me either. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
it was almost like there was a resolve, like if you were in this family and you're living, you're going to get sick. You can expect it, and this is how you should anticipate living your life. And so maybe that's part of that, that soul wound, or really just needing to separate from people who just have resolved that this is just how it's going to be versus that's not what I feel in my spirit.
Yes, absolutely. And the words create reality. Our words are really important of what we say. And as within the African American culture, it's not just what we say, it's what's was said about us all the time. You're going to be sick. Like, I don't know how many people ask me, every time, do you have diabetes? You have diabetes. And a lot of Black African Americans do. And I was pre-diabetic. I was 5.7, and then all of a sudden, I don't know what I walk a lot and I ate different. I'm now, down to 5.1 or whatever. And I was like, how did that happen? They're like, I don't know, but it's good, So, so it's like they speak things to you. You're going to get this. You're not going to do that. So we have to watch what we say because the world is saying a lot of negative things. There's no benefit of the doubt. That's just my belief. Oh, the benefit of doubt is that you're going to be able to play basketball or going to be, a mom or have a lot of stereotypes. So, but what about, like, let's be, and I love the, like the, a lot of more healthy people, healthy detoxes and people eating differently and other things. So, what you speak about, you can bring about. So, yes, programming of words and with meditation, I get people to become really quiet and then to start to hear those thought forms and how they're, projected out into the universe. And then they come back because we are like the divine. God said, let there be light. I feel God thought it. And then those thoughts create, form. So everyone has that ability. So if I'm thinking I'm going to be healthy, wealthy, and wise every day, your cells may respond differently. I do believe we can create a lot through our body because our body is a temple of our words, our thoughts, and our deeds, you know?
How do we begin to reprogram that? I mean, because it seems like I can speak for me, I can't speak for other people, but my programming is I have to like there are times when I'm consciously working on my reprogramming that I don't believe the reprogramming. I'm only believing, even though I'm speaking better over my life. Like part of the reason why I'm even having this podcast is to show myself something
Mm-hmm.
different than what I've been exposed to. And so
Yeah.
I need it, other women need it. So at the same time, you have some people who, one, are unconscious about sometimes their thoughts, but even some of us who are actually working to change their thoughts, but there's like this tug of war going on between what you've been conditioned and what you really want to believe. How in your practice do you have
Mm-hmm.
reconcile when there's these two thoughts at war going on?
Right. And that's, a good point about therapy is that when somebody says things over time, like, I'll never do this, or everything always happens to me, everything goes wrong. It's like, you got to watch what you say, what you think about, you bring about. So I'll make people make a list of other alternatives they could say, and they'll have a hard time. I'll help them along. This can be a good day. I can change my patterns. And I talk about subliminal programming CDs. I help them write things down, positive books, playing music in the background that says it, putting affirmations on your computer and catching yourself. And then I also explain the mind-body connection, that are words that create our reality. And that's the name of my business, Conscious Creations. It's not just about words, but it's are you consciously creating something, or are you living your life with unconscious programs that were from family lineage, ancestral lineage, or society's limitations on you? So we have to be really diligent, everyone, with what we're creating because we're getting so much input from others with all these different computers and, you know, when I grew up, it was 13 channels, and now there's like 1,000. So really, really being diligent. Your mind is like a garden to weed out these negative thoughts. And then also the theta healing also does that. We test the belief systems, and then we shift them through connection with the divine, it's a meditative technique, and people can feel this higher vibratory energy around them, and it actually can work. Yeah.
Wow, man, that's pretty amazing. So, as African Americans, like we say bah humbug to therapy, and
Hmm.
that's not for us. And we've got kind of the Western thought around therapy, and then you've got the ancestral healing part around therapy. When someone comes into your practice, like what kind of healing, how do you determine what healing modalities will work best for them? How do you get into deciding what is the best path for someone who comes into your practice?
Yeah, and it was interesting when I worked at this clinic that was in a predominantly African American area. One of the older therapists says, I think it's a myth that because we are swamped here, that Black people don't go to therapy because there were a lot. That's what she was a Caucasian. She was like, it's a myth. And there are a lot. And sometimes we go, though, when it's the last minute. It was interesting statistic that African American women drop out of therapy at the highest level than any other group. Because I think we feel like we can do it on our own. I don't know, but I have plenty, of people, and I'm losing your question, but it's like, how do you get them to go and learn, and how do I know what to do with a person? I,
Yes,
I,
when
I
someone comes in with and they want to meet with you, how do you determine what their clinical, maybe it's not the best strategy, but what therapeutic strategy you're going to use for them? Is it more holistic healing? Is it medication? How do you determine what's the best course of action when you have a patient with all of the tools that you have in your toolbox?
It's a great question. So I am an intuitive healer, and I am an intuitive. I get soul readings and messages, and I've cultivated that over years. And I also am a straight psychotherapist with a spiritual bent. So I put that all over my website so people know who I am, and that if they feel uncomfortable with it, they'll go somewhere else. And I'm so glad for therapy for Black girls, and there's so many more Black therapists out there, and people are doing great work. I consider patients souls and God's children. And I contracted, I'm going to help these souls that are in front of me and help the children that have come in. What are their soul's paths? So if you look at somebody as a soul and not as a patient, though it comes, of course, that if I'm in a very strong clinic, I think that way and clinically. But if they're coming to me privately, and I'm working for like certain companies that are just straight therapy, but this generation, they Google me and they see, oh, she's into this. And also it's law of attraction. A lot of them know that I have a sixth sense. A lot of them have a sixth sense. There's so many African American women that have a sixth sense, but they hide it, or they call it, the gifts. Yeah. Oh, they call
Talk
it,
about that. Why do you think
oh,
that that is? I mean, is it that their environment doesn't support it? Are we afraid of it? What,
yeah.
what, where does the hiding come from?
Well, I have a lot of theories. Like, for example, I worked with one woman in LA and a lot of people contact me from LA, and she goes, I want to tell you something. I said, what? She goes, but I don't want you to like put me as psychotic. She goes, I hear God's voice. And I said, you know how many Black women that hear God's voice? I said, no, I don't, I believe that all way. Yeah, like we are connected to the divine, and anyone can be. So many have told me that, or I just know things. I don't know how. I said, that's called intuition or discernment. The Christian way is discern, the gift is discernment or intuition. And they're afraid of it because I think we've been demonized, the voodoo, and that was evil. But, I think in many ways, African American women, especially are meant to, we're truth speakers.
Mm.
Because if you look at the media, a lot of the words are ours. Put your hands together. Back in the day, they use our words all the time. Um, I feel you, I hear you. It's because we're the original voice. And I believe that the original voice comes from deep in Africa and just comes out. And even I've worked with people in LA, young women who were supposed to do marketing, and 98% of the words were from Black culture. you know?
So you said
Yeah.
something interesting I want to explore a
Mhm.
little bit. And you said
Yeah.
we're truth speakers. And that is
Mhm.
something that is natural to some of us.
Mm.
If, and many of us are in environments where speaking the truth is shunned, uh,
Mhm.
that you are often villainized for speaking the truth. How does someone who is a natural, intuitive or a truth speaker really survive in an environment that does not support that? How do you,
Mhm.
and oftentimes we feel like sometimes we're in the wrong environment or we're misunderstood.
Yes, there is the soul wounds.
Mm.
Whenever you're silenced for your own truth, because I believe God gives everyone the gift of discernment. And, my practice is full of African Americans. I have women from every culture, people in Asia, Australia, America, Latina. Um, and a lot of people that are attracted to me have this sixth sense, and we all do. We just have to cultivate it. But people internalize it and become sick, and or people start to drink. A lot of addicts are very, very sensitive. We call them empaths, empathic. They feel on a deep level. They start to use. Oh, I just need a little toke to take it off. And oh, I saw a ghost in my house. I have to get rid of it. Or I don't want to hear my parents. They fought all the time. So, and if they're very sensitive, sensitive people are connected to God's words, and the God's light and their missions. But if they don't have good training or understand, they close down and they internalize it, and they can become bitter. They can become angry. They can become depressed. The word depression to means depress. What are you pressing down that you don't want to deal with? So as a therapist, I feel like sometimes I'm digging, like a dentist digging at it. Let's get to the root. This is what I hear. And to me, depression is wounds from the past, pressing it down. Anxiety is an unresolved wounds. The anxiety is fear of the future. I'm too nervous. I don't want to feel it. So I'm going to be in the state of, you know, nervousness. So anxiety is energy like this. Depression is energy like this. To me, the only thing that gets it even is mindfulness, being in the present and taking a breath. I'd always explain that why is mindfulness good for mental health or meditation? Because you become quiet and you hear that inner voice that has been pushed away, shamed away, abused away, and you start hearing your truth. I am sad. I was hated. Nobody loved me. Whatever comes up, let's look at it now. Let's dig it out like a garden, and let's put in new trees, new flowers, new words, and see them for who they really are, a child of the divine, a child of the Most High, a soul that can get rid of that pain.
Ooh, child. Okay, gotta pause here and unpack a little bit
Okay.
because we talked about in our last conversation about we've talked about soul wounds. We've talked about truth speakers not being able to tell their truth. Oftentimes that shows up as depression where you're pushing things down. And you finally, you said that you had started to see a pattern in your practice for Black women and middle-aged Black women. Um, and I believe it probably was the manifestation of some of these things that we have just talked about. What was the pattern you were seeing manifesting when you saw these women? Is there one?
Yeah. I saw it a lot when I was in LA and I was in that clinic, because I ran a couple groups, not being seen as, being of color, but being invisible, not being heard, being a true speaker, but having that suppressed, you know, not being liked. I don't like the way your hair is. I don't like your color. I don't like, your lips. I don't like your body shape. You're not the standard, BMI, all this negativity, negative, negative, negative. Or people, wounds of survivors of abuse, that nobody acknowledged that that was abuse, that's not okay. You don't deserve that. Oh, nobody ever told me that. Oh no, that was abuse. Let me give you the understanding. And then just having them unpack it and then begin to heal. And it comes up in the 40s, but and younger, if people have been through trauma. I mean, unfortunately, there was some, being in the area, deaths, murders, um, just a lot of grief. And if your child is killed, or so many women who lost their sons and or daughters, and nobody acknowledges that it was tragic, that gets pushed down, depressed. And our people don't want to look at it. They don't want to hear it. And that's a whole nother thing to unpack. Like, for example, I did a work stress group, and we are supposed to talk about them returning to work. And there was a one African American male who took care of his kids. And I said, I'll make up a name, Johnny. John, you seem so sad. And he goes, I lost my son. I was the sole provider. And he goes, he was just riding to school. I said, oh my God, he was 20. And I said, you know, what happened? He told me the story. And it wasn't that he was, it wasn't that he was depressed. He was in grief. He wasn't ready to go back to work. He did everything possible to take care of his two sons. He got them, he said, I got them to 20, and then he was taken from me. And what was interesting is I said, anyone else, which you usually do in the group, can relate to this pain of loss. There were 20 people in the group. 15 people lost somebody tragically. They weren't all through murder, through gun. Wasn't all African American. There was different, but majority were. And I was like, this is not a work stress group. This is a grief group. Who is
Mhm.
the soul that you lost? So we had to, work that. So, work through that. And some of the other clinical modalities, they wouldn't even go there because they don't want to see it. I don't want to hear it. So,
So you mentioned about grief and abuse.
yeah.
And I
Oh,
think that, especially as African American women, especially,
mm,
we are just taught to push through. You got to survive. You got to survive. And so there's so many microaggressions and wounds, and not just from the outside environment, right?
mm,
We've got them from our own family environment, the ones that were designed to care for us and honor us and respect us. And when that doesn't happen at home growing up, how does that manifest itself in midlife when you see women kind of going through? I know, well, I'll let you go with that before I ask.
yeah, yeah. There was I call it, I was going to write an article, but I probably be slammed the myth of the strong black woman. My God. Because when you're strong, you could take anything. I think that I believe, came out of slavery, like you can do anything to them and they'll still be around. It's like, we're not dogs, can't, and even you shouldn't treat animals that way. But there's that, um, I think it's a uh, miseducation, misperception from misogyny and racism that, could just dump everything on us and that we'll be able to take it. So that doesn't give us the right and the privilege to talk. I'm in pain. I want to cry. You know, I don't want to get out of bed. Um, and all the stereotypes that go along in mental health. I remember there was another a work stress, a group for intensive pain, and one of the therapists there wrote, "Oh, all these people, mostly African American, she didn't say that, don't want to go to work, okay? And don't just throw them in this group just because they don't want to work." And I replied all, I said, "Well, maybe because their ancestors worked for free." Oh boy, I got taken, I mean, like that's a soul wound.
Or work is toxic,
That,
where
oh
there
yeah. Oh yeah.
remember, it's interesting that you say that. I remember probably being the most vulnerable time in my late 40s and going through menopause and just really sad. It's just one of those where I had achieved all my goals and I really had the opportunity to feel. And my then, husband at the time was like, I just need you to be a boss chick. And I'm like, I just need to be a woman,
Mm,
and I realized that I was not in the right partnership at that time because he
mm,
had an expectation that I was, like you said, not a dog, subhuman, that he had a very difficult time dealing with my humanity. And
mm,
it's just one of those things where it's not safe in my house to be anything other
mm.
than an achiever. And
Wow.
it's just one of those things where you're like, do I have any value beyond what I'm supposed to be giving to other people? And that is when that kind of depression and that stress started happening, is that I'm only as good as my role. I'm only
Mm,
as good as how well I take care of other people. I don't
Mm,
have the opportunity to be vulnerable. I don't have the opportunity to say, in this environment, I'm failing and I need help. So I'm assuming, I can't assume, I know for me, there was not a space that I really could take that to because I was the one that everybody went to, the highest functioning one in my, my family circle. So who would I
mm,
go to say, I'm not okay when the people who are not okay are coming to you to say, I'm not okay? Did you have
mhm.
women in your practice who were kind of going through that same thing?
Right. And I can't remember exactly what you said, but when you said, like, I don't have the right to feel sad, or I'm misquoting your words, or to be vulnerable, I just think of Mammy. Like, you just, she's going to be always smiling and happy. And that's a soul wound within the culture that we just somehow are workhorses. We could just work and we don't have a right to be, because it was when women, and this is generational, were vulnerable. They would be killed. They would be murdered. They'd be shot on the field. They'd be attacked. And this is a deep soul wound. That's a good example of a deep soul wound. That if I stop working, I'm going to be just pushed away, or somebody else can take the job, or, um,
This is
yeah.
not funny, but I used to say in my marriage, and this is where the intuition comes from, right? I felt like I was his personal secretary, not his partner. And I used to
Mm,
say, I would say it in a flip way, but I was like, man, if something happens to me, he'll have another woman in here in 6 weeks. And
mm, mm,
we weren't even divorced yet, and that was already
mm,
happening, right? So it's
mm,
that knowing that I knew that you better
mhm,
perform in this environment or you will be discarded quickly. And that I would like to say that was the first environment that I felt that, but it wasn't. Um,
mm,
and so that's one of those wounds that I myself am processing through at 50 to be able to say, now wait a minute, something about this doesn't feel quite right, but you're not really sure what to do with it. One, because is there a space that I can share this and not be looked at like there's something wrong with me? Two,
mm,
do I have a moment to take the cape off without everything in my life falling apart? And three, how do I do it? Like I can't even, put language to it because I've never been able to communicate it.
mm.
How
Yeah.
how did you encourage the women in the practice to start to peel back those layers like
Mhm.
of an onion to kind of get to that?
Yeah, and I think it's important what you said about that I have to keep working if somebody else would be there. And this is kind of like the distortion of reality that other cultures have about us, that there are an enormous amount of educated, bright black women as opposed to the level of black men. It's like, what, 50 to 1. This is not a distortion. Yeah, like
Right.
if you're gone, you can get another one real quick. Like nobody, I've said this to people, other white, they said, I didn't know that. I was arguing with a supervisor who was white, was telling me, "Oh, you're overreacting." I said, no, we're not. No, there's not. Like black men don't last as long in their society, and this is very real. This is not. So we have to work hard to keep a job, and then he might lose it, and then there's meriting partners if you want to stay within the culture. So, but when the women come in, um, I really have to hear where they are. They know I do spiritual work. So I would ask, and you've talked about your age. There are something called soul cycles, and they're based on astrology. And we go through different year cycles that we grow. Women are very powerful beings. The moon has a 28-day cycle until it gets full. Okay. Um, and then also the moon's word, the name moon means menses. Okay. So when we incarnate as a soul into earth, we're incarnating into matter. And that word matter is where the word mother comes from.
Mhm.
So women, and we're on a female earth, very powerful. So every 7 years our soul grows because I believe earth is a school. So seven, the kids aren't as connected to the other side, more of the personality comes through. 7 more years is 14. It's like a clock. And that is when they're in high school. 7 more years is what? 21. That's you're an adult. But when the clock strikes 12 and you hit 28, it's called something called the Saturn return. So everything by this genius called the divine or source or God created the cosmos to help us to grow and learn in this environment. So when the clock strikes 28, this planet Saturn, the taskmaster, some people call it Satan, now it comes in and it teaches us, what have you learned? What are your goals? It's time to grow up. So all these issues will grow up, and it usually leads you to your path of what your soul is here to do, not what your personality. Everyone's supposed to get a job and do this. Your soul. At 28, when I was studying at Columbia, I started to see ghosts out of the blue. And I was like, Mom, what is happening? She's like, you're opening up. Oh, and then she said, Ma, my grandmother, she has gifts like us. Oh, okay, how are her grades? I don't care. And I was just terrified. And I took training and I got into Reiki and healing because I was very, very sensitive to energy. Like in New York, I felt like I couldn't breathe because it was so heavy. So then, and then I understood what being an empath and an intuitive, and I was terrified of how I can incorporate both. But I asked the divine, and then God kept showing me this is what you need to do. Everything is about, how can I serve thee? Not always, but I got to this point. So then you keep going, 35, another 7 years. People might think, what do I want to do? People come to me during these soul cycles. And then 42, maybe I should do this, maybe I should do that. But when you get up to 49, seven, seven times seven is 49. Seven times seven, which is also seven layers of skin. Seven's a very sacred number. 49 to 51, it's called the Chiron return or Chiron, Chiron. And that is the time of the wounded healer. So if you are working, you're a healer in some ways. You could be a mother, a teacher, and you haven't, things will come up out of the blue that you suppressed. Just like, where did this come from? I haven't thought about this in years. It can feel like your heart is heavy. It can feel like you're having a heart attack. So many people go to therapy then. And when I explain to them spiritually, they're like, oh, I'm not going crazy. I'm like, no, your soul is asking you, what have you learned? What are the wounds that you haven't healed? So if you have wounds as a woman, and you may look at your genetic line, a mother, a grandmother, did they have wounds at that time? What were their cycles? How did they treat you? How did partners treat you? Whatever the family patterns are will come up, and I'll unpack those. And then once you get to 56, well, there's one before it. 54 is a lunar return, lunar meaning moon. That's where the word lunatic comes from, lunar, because during the full moon, women's period, their bodies are full and then they release blood, and your soul can be full and then you release. So, at 54 is called the lunar return. And that's the steps gets more intense. Just like in college, it gets more intense when you get older, like you get to PhD, your work is deeper. So at 54, you'll start feeling things. When I saw Will Smith at age 53, when he hit Chris Rock, the first thing I said is, how old is he? Like he's 53. All his wounds get the lunar return was just probably around the corner. And then it gets to 56. 7 times 8 is 56. So you've done that cycle and you'll start feeling ancestral trauma, because we're here, souls, past life, ancestors, genetics. And then when it hits the second Saturn return is 59.5 to 61. So when I started getting, a lot of African American women at the time, I would explain cycles. Some would be like, wow, that's deep. I never heard of this. Others would be like, yeah, whatever, I'm depressed, So then I would unpack. I said, well, let's go to your childhood. How were you raised? How did your mother? What was the mirror? How did she raise you? And mother wounds would come up on a deep level. Oh, she didn't care about me, or she hurt me. What's that? Oh, I can't hear you for some reason. You're muted. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I said,
No.
hold on.
Okay.
Said something important. We got to back up and we've got to define this.
Okay.
What exactly is a mother wound?
Oh, boy. So, we are on a female earth. So the mother is very sacred because the mother is the creator. God is the creator, but the mother is the creator on the earth. So if your mother, the woman who gave you life, or it could be a stepmother or a grandma, if they are not loving, not supportive, kids learn from their mothers, both male and female, because they're the nurturers. That was the body you were in. Like maybe the mother had trauma, domestic violence when she was carrying you. Maybe she did never grew up. Maybe she was abused. Maybe she re-abused you unconsciously because she was abused, and her energy of depression. Remember, we're dealing with African American culture generation of people who definitely, like our ancestors, our parents older, did not go to therapy as much, or were so shamed in therapy they never went back. that these are repressed energy that get exploded out of somebody that looks like them. I have this picture behind me of the mother and the baby, that exploded onto the person. We call it transfers that look like them, their daughter. And that could mean that they did not feel they didn't like themselves, so they're not going to like someone that looks like them. They don't like the father, and you look like them. They were dismissed in life because they were bright and they never got to go to school, and you have the nerve to have a degree. There's a lot of levels of mother wounds. The mother being immature. There's, teenage moms and maybe never really wanted to have a child. Women who are survivors of abuse. A lot of times I've heard, I just had them. I didn't want them, or I didn't know. Boom, 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 four kids, four in a row. And that's also very traumatic because their body's being used as like a vehicle to bring in life that they were not ready or did not want. I've seen
Mm.
that a lot throughout every culture. And a lot of abuse for women in general was silenced. It sounds in the Black culture because we have to always be present a better face. We always have to be, smiling. And we can't, another thing that you alluded to, we can't be vulnerable. Vulnerability, this is ancestral trauma, gets us killed, murdered, deported, or put to another slave thing. I mean, I don't even have to know my ancestors to feel that survival instinct, or so, and then we're on a female earth, and the earth is brown. Black women are very powerful, and we're so degraded. We have the stereotypes, of just that are all negative. The mammy, the whore, the wanton. It's just all negative, negative, negative. Like you just can't be an intellectual oh, the angry Black woman. How could I forget that one? Well, maybe we have a reason to be angry. If nothing, if I've never had a son, but I see a son being killed on television, that's going to bother me. Or I see, people at war who gets pushed, or people that can't live in a certain environment. There's a lot of wounds that are, easily dismissed, overlooked, and shunned and shamed. And if we have no safe place to talk about that, I think that's why some of the churches were so important, then we internalize it. And then if we internalize it, if nowhere it goes out, it's going to go out to the person who's closest to you, a
Okay.
husband or a child. Yeah.
Pause. Right? So
Yeah.
we talked about internalizing, and we talked about, I told you about how sickness kind of manifested with the women in my life. And I
Mm.
think a lot of it had to do with that repressed trauma that really kind of turned inward, right? So let's get back with the mother wound, and let's talk about how in your practice you saw that mother wound showing up for midlife women.
Hmm. Yes, I had a Black women's group at the two places, two locations, but at this place I worked with, and they had deep trauma with their mothers, many of them, and just in life, and it was now a safe place to unpack it without. There was always this feeling that other people would judge you for talking about your mother. Now,
Oh,
other people, yeah, oh, yes, and they would,
oh, let's stop. If I heard, but that's your mother, but that's your mother, but that's your mother. And I think so there is this, I can only imagine in your practice, right? This is your mother is sacred, and you don't want to say anything against your mother, but maybe there is some still harm being happening, or some harm happening, and you don't even have a place to unpack that. Like, it's like people believe that a mother maybe is on a pedestal, like she's not human, or that, it's almost like, I know for me that I didn't feel like I existed, that I was here to serve my mother, period.
Mhm.
And to have conversations with people who were not in that space, or whose mother was maternal, or had processed differently, in our conversation that we had with the other women in our panel before. We had one who had completely gone no contact with her mother. We had one who was a reparenting coach. So you realize that this is not just you, but you don't necessarily have a space, and it's not even villainizing a mom. It's really just having a safe space to talk about something that is sacred, right?
Mhm.
So not only are you dealing with a wound potentially, but you don't even have a space, a non-judgmental space to even process it.
Hmm. I've had a lot of women that would tell me about all these other problems with work or partners or this and that. And I had a couple, and then, at like a year later, they're like, my mom doesn't like me. I was like, why didn't you tell me at the beginning? I didn't want to talk about it, or it's too painful, or but I have a lot of women that suffer from that, that a painful relationship that, society's putting Black women down, so why do you want to contribute to that? So they would hide it, or they feel like they're being judged. And I've seen it more than I would like to see, that it was very, very, very painful, that society didn't like you, and then your mom didn't like you, and oh, you look just like him. I can't stand it. And then they're stressing the job or finances or this and that. So it was a way to that, yes, they need a safe place. And then the group, we would talk about it. Like we would talk about mother wounds, and we would support each other. It was interesting, but it was psychotherapy, and they were all very intuitive. They all had their own gifts, and they were very spiritual, and some were okay with moms but not dads, so didn't matter, it was just one or the other. And um I remember a fellow coworker who was white said, she goes, how's your support group going? I said, it's not a support group, it's a therapy group. She goes, oh, I thought it was just for you guys just eating and chatting. So yeah, there's a big microaggressions, like we can't, like what, just because that they won't talk to you. But it was
Right.
just this that, that this is therapeutic, that food and gathering and community, that's the only time the culture was allowed to get together. And that's why I talk about it, so much with slavery and history, because you really see it played out in Black women's mental health and society and Black people, because of how we're always being microscoped in a negative way and being perceived. So those are the soul wounds, keeping the mother sacred, even no matter what you do. And like, for example, a mother saying that damn hard-headed, da 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 da. And that those terms came out of slavery. So somebody, the slave master, wouldn't take the baby. I mean, these are horrible memories, horrible, horrific. So then they keep saying these words, but not realizing they're programming their child negatively, and then the fighting happens. Originally, it was done because if they love them, I don't take my baby, they would take them. But if
Yeah,
they
but
said,
you're
he's not,
using that love as a weapon.
yeah, and if you say that he's stupid, he don't listen, he's hard-headed, oh, I don't want a little slave kid like that, forget it. So then they keep their child. So we have
You know,
to,
that's interesting.
yeah,
Next question I was going to ask you is
yeah.
about how that soul wound or the mother wound impacts other relationships. And so, I mean, I can think of times when I spoke harshly or, and you don't realize that that's something that has been programmed where, you're acting in opposition to what it is that you really want, but you're not conscious enough to even connect the behavior versus the outcome. And so, can you speak on ways that you saw maybe how these women with the mother wound and midlife were really having an impact on their children?
Yes, absolutely. Because getting that negative thing of programming from slavery and passing it down generation. People think it's, a long time ago, but when I was in a lot of people in LA are from Louisiana, and they had families that were sharecroppers and this and that. And it just it's passed down, and it also it's silence. I'm sorry, I'm missing the question because I was just started, like, how does it affect,
How
go ahead.
how does that how does the mother wound manifest for midlife women?
Yes.
How can that negatively manifest in relationships with their children, their own children?
Yes. Re dismissing them, um, not being kind to them, finding them, where children feel like they're more were a burden. Like, oh, I wish I can, I'd done well. Why did you go to medical school? I hate medicine, but I didn't want my mom. She always suffered, and she always said, that, you need to take care of me, or, emotionally or financially or this. And, mothers who were very very I guess the word is unconscious. They didn't like, it was able to, like, I'm recreating what my mother did. I'm recreating what my great grandmother did, or I'm recreating this sense of like this burden. Like I can't handle life, so I definitely can't handle a needy child. Because I have to take care of, I can't take care of myself. So how can I take care of somebody else? Then sometimes the children, well, you take care of your younger brothers and sisters. And I've seen that quite often. I've actually worked with a lot of Latino cult, that happened quite often. Like you're the mini mom. You take care of the six that they just keep having. And it's an African American culture too, where they would have to not be a child. And then they get older, and I was like, "Oh, you never had kids?" No, I was taking care of my other siblings. This is not working. So that is a very important relationship, and can become very toxic, and it can be really affect your viewpoint and your view of life. Sometimes women have a hard time working with other women because of that. Like, is this person going to take advantage of me? Is this person going to, you know, um, dismiss me, or maybe they're not and they see it that way. Um,
Um,
yeah, I can't be a good mother ever, because I wasn't mothered well. So that does come up quite often. And, supportive, sometimes they would get virtual mentors, and because there's a lot of pressure. It's a double, women, they're black, or, African American, they're black and they're female. So you got racism, misogyny, just that in itself is a lot. So sometimes not everyone can, have 10 legs or 10 feet and do everything, and they just crash, and then the kids are left to fend for themselves some ways. So that does come up with any culture who's oppression, anything, and yeah.
Oh, Miss Carolyn, I hate that we have to put a bow on this conversation because we just, we touched the surface on
Mhm.
so much. But what I will say to you is thank you for just even being able to take the lid off, for us to be able to have a safe space to just look at it, maybe without judgment, to say, huh, I noticed this, I noticed that, and maybe I'm not by myself. Maybe I can examine this a little bit further. And, I think when we talk about wounding and we talk about trauma and we talk about that there's not really a villain per se, because so much of this wounding and so much of this perpetuation is unconscious. And
Yeah.
so the whole point of me having you be here is to raise some awareness to some things that are common that we see in our culture with regard to mother and therapy and healing and, doing work, right? So again, I want to say thank you. Perhaps we'll have you come back and talk a little bit further, but I will let you kind of close us out with some final words about, if someone has never heard of any of the things that you talked about today,
Hmm.
give us some parting gifts, please.
Yeah. So this is part of the reason I got into energy healing. I didn't know it was to heal my own trauma, my own fibroids. And then but the energy healing, what it does, it heals on a soul level. So people can kind of just heal generational trauma. And I didn't know why, but that connected to the culture. So that's what it does. Past life, soul level, ancestral, Reiki and pranic and theta. But you can heal through this, that you're not a victim, you're worthy and deservable. I feel people have a lot of gifts, and once they unpack, it's almost like getting rid of negativity. You can put in light, you can put in love, you can connect to other different women that are healing. You can be more sensitive, you can be a good partner, you can be a good mother. And I've seen such wonderful transformations for a lot of people. Like LinkedIn is a public site, and I do coaching, and I have 101 testimonials. And which I'm very proud of. And I've seen a lot of people shift and grow. And I always try to connect with God and everyone should too, regularly, to say, how can I help this soul in front of me? And if I'm not the person, let me find them something else that can help them.
That was enough for me, just to really look at someone not by their behavior, but realize that they are a soul. And what can I do to help this soul, even our own? I mean, I think
Yeah.
it's amazing. Thank you so much, Carolyn. And I will put your books, your links, so that the women here can find you. I know you have so much more to say, and I appreciate you taking this time out to chat with us. Thank
Yeah.
you very much. This is the Midlife Makeover Movement. If you like what you're seeing here, please like, share, and comment. We have so many more wonderful people to share with you as we go on this healing journey so that we thrive in midlife. Thank you, Miss Carolyn. You have a
Thank you.
great day.